Hello, everybody. Today we have a special guest for our special discussions on a special topic, which is tariffs. Everyone has been talking about tariffs for the last couple of weeks since the Donald so-called Liberation Day. So today, to help us unpick what tariffs are, why we should care about them, and how they will impact us, we have a special guest, Irish economist John McCarrick. John, thanks for being with us today.
Welcome, Caoilfhionn.
Great. So could we start by you giving us a brief intro to what are tariffs, how long they've been around, and kind of how they've changed over the years? Because in recent years, until what has happened the last couple of weeks, we haven't heard too much discussion about tariffs.
No, you could say break the history of tariffs down to pre-war, pre-World War II, and post-World War II. In the earlier period, tariffs were a normal part of revenue raising right across Europe when we were mainly dealing with funding royalty and their wars. And tariffs went up and down to match that. There was also, of course, land taxes and property taxes to supplement that, but income tax didn't come in until the late 19th century. The Battle of Waterloo was the temporary little measure that required the introduction of income tax, but it has now outlasted the death of Napoleon by a quarter of a millennium. So the temporary arrangement held. But so that was the origin of tariffs, and ports were given to members of the royal family as their access to a revenue stream, what is now given as a royal allowance by states. Gradually, income tax grew, sales taxes grew, and tariffs reduced when people began to realize, or governments began to realize, that open trading was a better alternative. It created more innovation within the economy. It allowed for a broader range of goods to be offered to consumers, and generally cheaper goods. And that movement was part of the multilateral arrangements that were put in place after World War II, including the General Agreement for Tariffs and Trades, which emerged in today's world as the World Trade Organization, based in Geneva. Now, for some time, for a couple of presidencies, the US has been doing a lot, right back since Trump's last term, to undermine the standing and effectiveness of the WTO, because one of the main jobs it does is rule on trade disputes. You had to have a certain number of judges appointed by each country to facilitate that, and America has withdrawn his cooperation from that since Trump's last period of office.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, thanks for that summary. So basically what I've heard is that tariffs were the initial way to tax businesses, and up until income tax came in post-Waterloo, that was kind of the main tax that applied. But that in recent decades, with the increase in globalization, countries have realized that they need to reduce and harmonize their tariffs to facilitate international trade, but that is now changing. I didn't realize that the WTO has been under pressure since Donald Trump's first term. So obviously a lot has happened in the last couple of weeks. Can you again try and give us a simple summary of what Liberation Day is all about and what the various announcements and U-turns and changes are saying?
Well, Liberation Day is first of all trampling on all multilateral and international trade agreements that existed up to now. And there is a most favored nation status applied under WTO, for which America and Europe, the European Union, have with one another, meaning that their duties are at the lowest level, and they aggregate around 2.2% each way. I think it's 2.7, 2.2. The European ones being that slightly higher. There's different calculations on that, but that's because it's not just about the levels of tariff, but how it weighs across the full range of goods. So it can vary from time to time. But that's the level to which it has been reduced. Some items like American cars have a higher rate, for instance, coming into Europe. I think it's 10%. But the pattern has been that every effort is made in every round of negotiations. No one has for the last century, the 20th century, ever proposed an increase in tariffs. It has always been about reducing, because tariffs are an extra cost of doing business. They exclude some businesses from the competition in the home market. So they're a protective method.
Yeah.
And people have long since, once you accept the proposition of globalization, and even if you don't accept it, when you have to live with globalized supply chains. Everybody has it. If you want to buy a pair of gloves, you can't, there's going to be a global supply chain in assembling them. The line is going to come from somewhere, the thread from somewhere else, the labor from somewhere else, and the leather or the cotton or whatever it is. So that global supply chains is an essential part of the modern world of international trade. Some countries have grown with that and specialized in it. Singapore, Hong Kong being case in points, and indeed Ireland. Ireland has almost 100%, about 100% of its total GDP in international trade between imports and exports.
Exports, yeah.
Now, another thing that comes in that you have to recognize here when we're talking tariffs and Liberation Day. Tariffs and Liberation Day only apply to goods. And goods manufacturing amounts to 18% of the US economy and about the same percentage of the European economy. So it's a focused effort, and its target and objective is to bring back, as Trump puts it, bring back manufacturing into the American heartland. But it's bringing it back through competition, through
protectionism,
and protection, rather than through competition. If you brought it back through competition by upskilling and improving your products and finding innovations that make you better and cheaper than others, that would be excellent for everybody. The trouble with globalization is it benefits everybody. There's millions of jobs that have been created around the world. Most of the third world is emerging out of poverty, not as a result of agriculture, but by being able to transition from agriculture into manufacturing. Most of the fast-growing developed world, which predominantly is the United States, Europe is the slower-growing world, they're growing faster into services and away from manufacture. 2/3 of the US economy is based on internationally traded services, as distinct from local services and public services. So that it's 3 times the size of the manufacturing sector. Yet we haven't heard a thing about that. And the interesting thing about it is that if you make it impossible for countries to export their goods into the US as a result of a protective measure that makes them uncompetitive, they can certainly put the axe to your supply of services.
Oh, okay. And
they don't have to do it even by duties, by taxes or by tariffs,
So how would they do it?
Well, for instance,
just not provide the services.
Like you could technology. The types of services are financial services, insurance companies, banks, credit, money movement, credit cards, which are all American across Europe. That's a substantial part of it. Also, tourism, sport, entertainment, also licenses, franchises, intellectual property, patents. All of these things amount, and a lot of them are fairly arbitrary. For instance, how much do you charge an Irish manufacturer for your American patent? How much do you charge? How much do McDonald's charge an Irish McDonald's franchisee? They're arbitrary, negotiable, depending on the strength of the brand and the value they add. So that, and the governments can make it very difficult in the way they regulate these and the way they tax them. So that, and Trump can have a very strong impact on the demand for American services.
Services, yeah.
Because you kind of create a monopoly of service, but you can have a demand, just as Elon Musk has dampened the demand for Tesla by his behavior to the rest of the world. And that's, I think if, without ever introducing tariffs on the internationally traded services, there's a huge range of armory that any government has in countering the tariffs on goods, which is a much smaller fraction of the total economy.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
interesting, because I didn't realize that we're only talking about 18 to 20% of the global economy. And so what are the main big new tariffs that have come in? Is it basically on China? Is that the highest one?
Of course, China is the one that they're targeting. Everybody else is subject to a 10% rate, and but that's for the next 90 days or 84 days from now, and or 85. And the intention then is to negotiate with each. And I think that he will have to come to terms with the things we're talking about, that you have the option of protecting your industries, of looking back for your growth, looking to your past for your growth, rather than looking to your future. What we did in Ireland, what every country in Europe has done, is where they've lost industries through lack of, through reduced competition or through globalization, essentially, cheaper labor being the main thing. But where they lost industries, there has been what they refer to as a just transition policy. If 10,000 people here or there were lost their jobs, then there would be retraining for the younger ones, early pension, retirements for the older ones, and then there'd be provision for sons and daughters of people who lived in a traditionally industrial tradition, maybe took up apprenticeships rather than went to university, to try to stream them up into where the jobs are. Because within services, within the broad range we're talking about, a university graduate is sort of entry-level qualification almost, right? Whereas a trade apprenticeship is the entry-level qualification in the manufacturing industry that have been lost to the poorer countries. They've been lost to the poorer countries because the technology is easily transferable, and the incomes there are a fraction of US
what
or
they
Europe,
are in the US. Yeah. And with the big changes in the tariffs, there's been a lot of talk about how it will cause a global recession. We obviously saw huge downs and then increases in the stock market. But do you think that that's likely to happen, or will it depend on what happens in the next 84 days of negotiations?
Well, it will depend on that. But there was a recession in the offing anyway. Europe is at a low growth and has been for a long time at a low growth level. Trump was saying during his election campaign that if they re-elected Harris, that the recession was inevitable, but electing him and there wouldn't be a recession. But now I think there will be. Because it's supply chain related and because market development is expensive. It's not just a question of telling a ship to go there or instead to go somewhere else. You have to develop the market at one
takes a long time
with wholesalers, with retailers. You have to build your brand in that market. You have to, engage with the advertising world and so on, and so that it's simply not possible. And similarly, the type of industries is trying to bring home, big pharma from Ireland or big high tech from Ireland, they would talk about multi-billion-dollar manufacturing projects, and they could take 5 or 6 years from the decision to commit to investing in Ireland for the first run of products through that factory. They're not going to be turning and restarting in America, within a few months or even a few years. It's a 10-year cycle, really, from product development through, because the logical thing for companies they refer to them as American companies, but of course the point of them is that they're multinational companies, multinationally owned, and many of them registered abroad, but they have a substantial number of American shareholders, and a lot of them were originally registered in the US. But it's like this notion of applying nationalism to companies when the whole basis of the globalization success, which brought, I suppose you could say, 1 billion people out of poverty in China and the Far East, will hopefully bring 1 billion people out of poverty in Africa, and then to think that for people of 350 million in the US, that they should try to stop that for these billions of people elsewhere and leave them with no chance of participating in the modern developed economy. That's what it amounts to. That's what protection means. It applies also to agriculture, that the Americans and the Europeans spend too much of their food surpluses ruining markets for farmers in poorer countries.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point you make, that there is really no such thing as an American company anymore. They're all, like, the types of companies that are operating internationally are multinational enterprises, not owned generally by Americans. They're listed stocks. And so it's almost like this protectionist stance is anachronistic in this time of globalization. It's bad for everyone.
That has failed every time it's been tried in the 21st or in the 20th century. This is the first effort in the 21st century. And it will fail. It will fail because even with Ireland, where we would be, or take Europe as a whole, the trade between Europe and America is 1.6 trillion. That's not easy to shift. But about $1 trillion of that is in services. That's not under threat. So if the 0.6 had to be dealt with differently, it would take time, but it could be done. It may even reduce the outputs, but that's how you end up in recession. If people have to reduce their output, go on 3-day weeks, lay off people, try to adjust to your new demand situation because you've lost a substantial market. That's how we create recessions, and that's really all that's in this, because there's no chance that it could work to do what Trump wants it to do, which is to recreate behind a protective barrier what they had in the past in the way of manufacturing industry in the Rust Belt. That's not going to happen.
And that's simply not possible, because that's not how the globalized world works. Is that right?
Yeah, and even Tesla, one of Tesla's critics within the cabinet in the US, pointed out that he's not a car maker; he's a car assembler. Every part
exactly is made outside.
Equally with Apple. Apple is registered in Ireland.
Yeah.
It's manufactures nothing in America, but he considers it an American company. And the whole of all of the Fortune 500 companies, about 38% of their equity is held outside the US.
Yeah. And let's talk about Ireland for a minute, because Ireland does have a lot of products that it sells into the US. Do you know roughly what percentage of GDP are pharma and other, I guess it's mainly pharma, medical, and computer hardware
and software, like there were big software developers, and then the food side of the equation, food and drink, because drink is a big part of it, and dairy products, butter is a big part of it, comes to about 2 billion, and there's about 60 billion of trade in pharma out of Ireland into the US by mainly US companies who are manufacturing the product here and packaging it to a US specification in that country. But they're also manufacturing the product for Africa and for Europe, who because the labeling requirement and the micro packaging of pharma products is very precise, and so there's a lot of value to be added, and you're set up to make the bulk product here. So our GDP is 600 billion. So 60 billion is 10% of that. So that's what we're talking about. If you know, that's roughly what you're talking about. Yeah.
And do you think Ireland is going to be badly impacted by these tariff increases?
The Irish drinks industry is likely to be hard hit. Irish dairy products going into the US are likely to be hard hit. But that's not really a problem, because there's like 90% of Irish dairy products are exported anyway. So they have many, many bases already in the world market. And it's not a problem to move what would be 2 or 3% of the market. Whereas pharma or the other areas we're talking about, software and IT, is a much bigger problem. But because it's company to company, this is another thing that comes into this, and transfer pricing becomes an issue. And because they're manufacturing in Ireland under license from their parent, it's very easy for them to change their cost
Oh, yes.
Because if you bring your manufacturing license from 1% or from say 20% down to 1% or 2%, that's compensating. It's shifting price and revenues, and that because anyway the U.S. Trump has decided that he's bringing their corporate tax rate down to the same as Ireland's, 15%. So the reason they would be charging the license fee to an
Was for the
Irish
tax
corporation,
arbitrage, but now that's disappearing.
and
Wow.
so, and it means that he can't really, his tariff wouldn't work in the
Yeah.
big pharma context in that way. And similarly, anywhere there's French, anytime there's intellectual property involved, that's an adjustable figure.
Yeah.
So, and it's dramatically.
Well, I think our transfer pricing partner, Cabrini, would have something to say about that. But I take the point. It's very interesting.
But when you're about license, it's only a question of where you locate it.
Yes, exactly.
Or patent rights, where you locate them, and because that can be charged in the US rather than in Ireland, and you could be greatly reducing the price. Given that they're already equalised or planning to equalise their corporate tax. It's not about massaging the transfer pricing system. It's about changing the locus of your intellectual property.
Yes, yeah, agree. Okay, so lots still up in the air. It sounds like there is going to be more clarity as negotiations continue the next 3 months. And I mean, it does seem like Donald just wanted to kind of throw the cat amongst the pigeons, so do a big splash to kind of start some activity, and now maybe more kind of rational tariffs, even if there are increases, will be agreed.
Well, I wouldn't be that optimistic, because if we now have 2% each way, or 2.2 or 5% each way between US and Europe, and we're starting before negotiations open at a reduced rate of 10%, which was brought down from 20%. I don't know how they're going to get below the 2%, which would be progress on where we are. Anything less than those 2% each way is recession.
Yes. Okay. Wow. Yeah. And that is, I heard you saying there's basically no way this is not going to cause a recession. Yeah. So that's quite concerning news for us all.
Unless he abandons the whole proposition,
Yeah.
Which is, I don't like it. But I think somebody, his Treasury Secretary, seems to be taking over as the adult in the room, which will help, because there's other people there who just, it's the king with no clothes. They're all telling this is a great plan because they don't want to tell him that he looks stupid or that it's him. Now, Musk, in fairness, but Musk is a direct player in this very,
of course,
global thing. And he understands the consequence of that, and he's been against this from the beginning.
Yeah.
And that's why Navarro refers to him as a car assembler. He's not even a car maker.
No, agree. Well, John, thank you very much for those very insightful comments. It's a very interesting area, and there'll no doubt be lots more discussion and activity over the next few weeks and months.
Yeah, and there was one big kicker that changed things this time, and you have to bear that in mind when you talk tariffs. The market crashed. Trump didn't mind. He pointed to people in his cabinet. You made $1 billion. You made 800 million down. On these movements. But when the bond market moved, that's when he got jumpy. That's when he got frightened, because the dollar started to weaken and the price of the government's borrowing was going up. So
do you think that's why he backtracked then?
I'm certain, yeah. Well, I'm certain there's logic in it, and that because this was Scott Bessent was the Treasury Secretary, was the guy who came with the message that changed his mind. And I believe that that's what he saw. Because when you're 100% debt to GDP borrowed, and you have a 6% current budget deficit, and you want to increase government spending to do all these wonderful things, and you're hoping to replace income, you're giving income and corporate tax concessions to be funded by tariffs, and if they're not going to come in, and if their interest cost goes up, the pinch is getting tighter.
Yes. Wow, that's very interesting.
I think that's the killer blow.
But that's also quite concerning, because that means it was a real miscalculation. There isn't a well thought out plan here.
The phrase he repeatedly used to Zelensky is coming to bite him. He has no cards.
Yeah.
No.
Ooh, scary times.
Yeah.
Well, John, on that note, let's leave it. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Keelan. Bye-bye now.